Hi, my name is Moria Meet, and I'm the Senior Genealogy Librarian here at the Center for Jewish History. Welcome, everyone. Thank you so much for coming out tonight. This is, I would say it's the 6th program in this year's Family History Today series, which is the Ackman and Ziff Family Genealogy Institute's series of public programs that we put together on a fairly monthly basis. For those of you who are new to the Center for Jewish History, we provide a collaborative home for 5 partner organizations that together form the largest archive of the modern Jewish experience outside of Israel. The Center's Genealogy Institute provides access to a wealth of genealogy resources through its library, online databases, research guides, and the expertise of our staff, myself included. At the Institute, we strive to make family history accessible to researchers of all ages, abilities, and levels of experience, whether Jewish or non-Jewish. And we operate like a public library. So that means you can come in Monday through Friday. You don't need to make an appointment. And we help people on a walk-in basis. There's always someone on hand to orient you to our resources or to answer any research questions you may have. And if you're unable to come in person, we can also take questions by phone and by email. Lastly, we offer a variety of educational opportunities, including our monthly series, like tonight, and our free workshops for groups from senior centers, New York City public schools, and religious or nonprofit organizations. So for more information about the Genealogy Institute, please pick up one of our flyers at the back of the room. You're also welcome to come up to me at the end of the program and ask me any questions you have. And lastly, you may also pick up a flyer for our next program, in which I will be presenting on how to research your ancestral towns. And that's scheduled to take place on August 13th. So please feel free to come back again for that. And before I introduce our speaker, I just want to say a few housekeeping policies. Please silence your devices if you haven't done so already. You may have noticed that there's wine and refreshments in the back. I will just ask that you wait till the end of the presentation to get up and enjoy those things. And please hold your questions to the end of the presentation. I know you all probably have a lot of questions, but Michael also wants to, give you some foundational information before we get into that period. So please, I just ask that you hold your questions to the end. And you are welcome to take photos of any of the slides tonight. So,
I think you did.
Okay. Okay, so Michael Simonson. He has been an archivist here at the Leo Baeck Institute since 2002. And that's, for those of you who are not aware, the Leo Baeck Institute is our library and archive here that specializes in the history of German-speaking Jewry. He is currently Leo Baeck Institute's reference archivist and director of public outreach. He's spoken at the International Conference on Jewish Genealogy and has been featured in the New York Times. And he is my go-to person for all things German Jewish history and genealogy. So please join me in welcoming Michael Simonson.
Good evening, and thank you for the nice introduction. I just as often go to Moria. She's being modest. Yes, tonight I was focusing my talk more on the research I do. A lot of my role is to find the families today for Stolpersteine programs taking place in Germany. So a town or a movement of people who want to place a Stolpersteine will write us and say, we would like to know where the Rosenthal family from Meissen, as an example, is today. And then I look and try and find those people, connect them, and so they can go back to Germany or at least be in touch with the people in Germany. I was originally going to focus on that, but many of you wrote me and called me, and I realized you had many more questions than simply sitting through a kind of drier discussion about research technologies. So I made my speech a bit more organic. So I'm going to talk about the history of the Stolpersteine program. And actually, I'm going to programs, I should say. It's not really just one program. I'm going to talk a little bit about the history of German Jews through the Holocaust period, which relates to why, in some ways, this program does exist. Reactions to the program, both positive and negative, and other things different communities have done as a result of the Stolpersteine programs. You know, I should say initiatives instead of programs. So I just want to make that clear. I'm stuck on the word programs all the time, which that's not correct. As you see in the Talmud, it says a person is only forgotten when his name is forgotten. I thought that was a nice way to begin the discussion. Oops, here we go. Hold on. We've already been goofy. There. All right. To begin, I'm going to talk about the story of German Jews in particular in the Holocaust period. Approximately 160,000 to 180,000 Jews in Germany were killed in the Holocaust. That was 21% of the total population of Jews in Germany. In Austria, it was actually a little bit smaller percentage. So in both countries, most people did get out. It wasn't easy to get out by any means. It was very difficult to find a place to go. But in the end, most people were able to get out. In the case of Germany, they had all through the 1930s, from 1933 to 1941, basically. People were still getting out in 1941. I know a family, they got out in December of 1941. So, and in Austria, it was they were taken over in 1938, but Ackman put in a program in Austria where everyone was first generally relocated to Vienna, where almost everyone lived anyway who was Jewish in Austria. And then from there, they went through a kind of funnel system where they were robbed of all their assets and their possessions. And then in the end, they were booted out of the country. This was the idea. Of course, for these Jews, they also had to find a place to go because no one, as we all know today, wanted the Jewish refugees. So in the end, people went to some very far-flung places. Most ended up, however, coming to the United States in the end. I'm going to talk a little bit about who was left. Let's see if I have a good time with this. There. This is a photograph of elderly Jews in a nursing home in Laupheim, which is in Swabia, 1939. Who was left? Who couldn't get out? In Germany, it was largely the elderly because they could not get a working visa. America, as an example, had gone through the Depression. They were not about to let people come here who couldn't work and support themselves. This was true of about every country, basically. So the elderly were caught. And then after that, the choice was the younger people. Do we leave our elderly parents or relatives, or do we stay with them? A woman named Lucy Adelsberger, in her memoir, she was a doctor in Vienna, and she says in her memoir that for all German Jews, at the end, that was the real question. Do we stay with our elderly relatives, or do we go? Then there were other people who couldn't get visas, people who had mental or physical handicaps, people who did not have the correct papers. As an example of that, a lot of people had moved to Germany from places such as Poland. And these people were more Orthodox Yiddish-speaking people. And often when they married, they did not register with the city hall or with the authorities. They just had a ketubah created within the Jewish community. Well, when it was time for them to try and get out, they presented these. And of course, these were not acceptable as identity papers. A lot of these people ended up trapped in Germany as well. I raised the point that most people in these two countries survived because that's really integral to the Stolpersteine in the sense that there were a lot of relatives, a lot of descendants of these people trapped who have been able to remember. This is less true, of course, in Poland, in Holland, in other countries that were overran immediately by the Nazis, and of course nobody could get out. And of course there the death rates were extreme. This is a deportation of Jews from Hanau to Theresienstadt. Just using this example of the deportation. Even though I talk about elderly people and stuff, of course there were people of all ages, children and so on, who fell into the other groups or who were there because their parents could not leave elderly relatives. And now I'm going to talk a little bit about jumping forward. I'm going to spend a little more time on this slide though, because I'm going to give it some background. After the war, there was a denazification program that took place in Germany. Today, scholars would say it generally was not really very successful. At the time, people who were known to be Nazis were supposed to attend classes, programs, where they were, in a sense, re-educated of their Nazi beliefs. The real result of this was people who were Nazis in the Nazi time remained in positions of power in Germany after the war. And this created a lot of silence. And people did not talk about what had happened. People did not, the younger generation were not told, they didn't really know. In 1968, which is sometimes called the watershed year in Germany, there was a lot of student protests, just as there were in other countries in Europe and in America too. But in Germany, it had an extra layer. And this layer was younger people upset and asking their parents what they had done during the war. They were beginning to realize they had lived in silence and in ignorance about what had happened. And had their parents played a part, had their families played a part, had people they known play a part. So this created, was a large part of the student protest movement. And in fact, one reason I bring that up is many of the initiatives in Germany and Austria today for the Stolpersteine really are largely carried out by that generation, what you'd say in Germany, the 68ers, who grew up within that late 60s feeling of protest and counterculture in Germany and confronted their parents and grandparents about what had happened. Not that they always got answers. In the 80s, the television series Holocaust aired. That was 1978. And it showed in Germany as well. And this was a really another big cultural moment in Germany regarding memory. It was one of the most widely watched television shows in German history. And they had a panel of experts afterwards on the television that would take call-ins. So they were flooded with phone calls of people saying, how could this happen? How did I not know this? How did we not know this? Very angry, they didn't even know how to answer these kind of questions. And I think it was really with that in 1987, that television show, The Power of Television, that people really began to be energized to remember and to ask, even more than before, once they had seen it kind of visually acted out. And that leads us up to where I'm going to talk about Günter Demming himself. He was, first I'm going to find him here. Yes. So Günter Demming now, he is the man who, you could say, started the idea of the Stolpersteine. And looking at Demming's life, you can see how he has grown up as a late 68er in a country that was becoming increasingly aware of the Holocaust at the ages he was also becoming a young man. He grew up in Nauen and Berlin, and he acquired his Abitur in 1967, a year before the big student riots broke out in Germany. Later that same year, he began studying creative education at the Berlin University of Arts, focusing on industrial design. And in 1971, he transferred to Kassel, where he resumed the study of creative education and passed the state examination. Then he spent 2 years working with historical monuments. That's at the same time the TV show Holocaust aired in Germany. From 1980 to 85, he was an artistic scientific colleague on the art faculty of the University of Kassel. And in 1985, he opened up his own studio in Cologne, where he worked on many projects. And there was one project he did, which took place on December 16th, 1992. And this is really what started the Stolpersteine initiatives and the Stolpersteine as objects. So it was an anniversary. It was on that day in 1942, Himmler had ordered the deportation of gypsies, still in Germany, to Poland. In Cologne, most of the gypsies had already been deported, actually, but this was to take the remnant that were left. So what Günther did is he decided to trace the road to deportation. He created a printing machine that was circular and made of metal, and he rolled it through the inner city to the train station using the same route that the gypsies had taken to the train station. Now, this was not the names of people. This was actually the SS orders for the deportation of the Jews. That's what was being printed onto the sidewalk or the street the whole way to the train station. And he actually did this for a very political reason. It was because there was a very big debate in Europe at the time. It still comes and goes as a debate for sure, about the presence of the Gypsies, the Roma and Sinti people in Germany. So for him, it was a political act to support Sinti and Roma rights in Germany. Gradually, this idea turned into the idea of commemorating various victims of Nazi persecution. First, he wanted to write about this idea, though. In 1993, he published further details on this project, and he outlined the concept in a book which translated would be called Megalomania, Art Projects for Europe, which says a lot about how he was really thinking of this as an artistic venture. And actually, I should actually say this for later, but if I don't have time to say it, I'll say it now. There's actually a conversation in Germany right now because many people in Germany, in the German government, see his work now as a kind of memorial fixed work and not as art. He sees himself as an artist. Of course, this affects tax payments. So this is a big discussion. I think we were just talking about this yesterday again, yeah. In 1994, he exhibited 250 Stolpersteine with names, but these were names of Sinti and Roma people in Cologne. He put them outside St. Anthony's Catholic Church. This was soon followed in Berlin, and it started with 55 stones laid in Kreuzberg, followed by 600 more in Cologne. Now these stones included many Jews, and increasingly it became remembering Jews. And now, if we jump to today, as of October 2018, there's 70,000 Stolpersteine in Europe. And they can be found mostly in Germany and Austria, but they're also, and I'll read this really quickly, Netherlands, Hungary, Poland, Czech Republic, Belgium, Ukraine, Italy, Norway, Slovakia, France, Switzerland, Romania, Greece and Spain, Belarus, Lithuania. So it's spread rapidly through the years. So I'm going to now talk about a little more in-depth details about it. This is quickly Mr. Demming laying stones at an event. I can't remember where this place is. But what he does, and I think we all know this, so I'll move through this part very fast. He's booked for a day. He comes, the stones are prepared in his workshop. He has a staff that prepares the stones. The stones are laid in the ground. And they're usually laid in front of the last house that the people, being remembered, chose to live in. But this has changed over time. It used to be the last address, but this was often what in Germany would be called the Judenhäuser, the houses the Jews were forced to live in before their deportation. So when you would walk down a street, say in Berlin in these early days, you would see big groups of Stolpersteine. But see, that's often because this was a house all the Jews in that area had been forced to move into that house prior to the deportation. So now they try and do it the last house that they chose to live in. And that's a different thing. Another thing that's different is that they used to only do victims of the Holocaust, people who'd been killed. Now they also do people who immigrated, people who committed suicide are seen as victims. People who survived the death in concentration camps are in hiding as well. So now it's covering, even if a whole family immigrated, there can still be Stolpersteine for them. Here's an example of Stolpersteine. I think it's pretty clear to see the name, the places they were murdered, their birth dates, their death dates. Many times they don't have a death date for obvious reasons. So because it's not clear what happened. This is especially true for people who were sent to a place called Izbika. Maybe some of you recognize that. Izbika is kind of, no one really knows usually what happened to those people in that. All right, now I'm going to talk a little bit about some of my own experiences. I'm going to talk about a town in the south of Germany called Bruchsal, and that is near Baden-Baden. So what happened is Rolf Schmidt, who is a citizen of the town, he became very interested in finding out what had happened to the Jews when he discovered that in the basement of his family home, there was furniture, and the mother confessed it had been taken from a Jewish family when they had been deported. And he says, he's told me, he doesn't make it a secret, his father had remained a Nazi really his entire life. So he felt very moved to try and make amends and remember the history of the Jews in Bruchsal. He reached out to the Leo Baeck Institute and to me and someone from the town. They had formed a working group, a memory working group. And one of the men was here in New York and came to visit me. And we looked and we found something interesting, that this man whose collection we had in our archives was from that town. And actually, that man was named Harry Ettlinger, and he was one of the monuments men. He died recently, but he was a big deal. He used to be here at the Center for Events and so on. So of course that was a big boon for the town too. A little town, to suddenly have this kind of celebrity figure that, to be remembered. It didn't help. I mean, it helped sway the city, I'm sure, in some regards. Though the mayor of the city was also very pro-memory work. The city had also had a lot of problems because there was a movie they found in their city hall archives, which was called Bruchsal is Jew-free. And this was a movie of the deportation of the Jews from Bruchsal, showing them all going to the train station. Well, the city for decades have been trying to kind of keep it quiet, cover it up, and let people see it, but people knew it existed. And so this group also had found out about that movie. And actually that movie now as it's released. You can even see it on YouTube. It's all over the place. They purposely really worked to release it as part of their project. So they invited Mr. Ettlinger and his extended family to go back to Germany, and they renamed a street after his grandfather, who'd been a big part of civil life in Bruchsal. And after that, they decided to start establishing Stolpersteine. And they found a very positive response among young people in Bruchsal towards this kind of memory work. And so now every year they put in 5 or 8 Stolpersteine, and they publish a small book about the families that are being remembered that year. He was actually, this was in Berlin, at an award to honor him. There's this award called the Obermeyer Award, and I had actually nominated him because he'd done so much work. So, and he won. So we were at that party. This is a family, obviously. They're from Boston. And this is in Bruchsal. And they're in front of the ancestral family home where many of the relatives had lived who had been killed. Of course, it's the woman here is the family member. She obviously is part of a group that managed to immigrate, her grandfather. So this was actually very interesting. I remember this day, very particular, because it was, I was kind of in the back of the group, and there was 2 older men on a bike, and they were behind me, and they started arguing very loudly. They must have been children during the war years. And one of them said, yeah, there were some real pigs in this town in the Nazi time. The other man wouldn't let go of his bike and was saying, yeah, well, you know, so-and-so, I don't remember the name, he burned down the synagogue. And the man said, that's not true. And he was trying to knock the bike over. They were old men. And then the other man managed to get away and bicycled away and said, you're crazy. And so it was interesting to see because, you know, you think that everyone is so old, elderly now, and there's people that in some ways maybe these issues wouldn't continue to exist at such a community level, and yet they do. Also in Bruchsal, a man came up to me. He said, is so-and-so coming? I was friends with him in school. I said, no. I said, he was invited, but he has very bad memories of the war, and his mother was killed, and he's not coming. Oh no, telling me his friends, I'm his friend, and so on and so on. Well, later, when I looked into it and talked to the family, he had actually been in the Hitler Youth and had really tortured this boy and the other Jews quite mercilessly. But I don't know if he was looking for some kind of redemption for how he acted at that time. Something was going on. And he really had tears in his eyes when I told him this person was not coming. So, you know, I always find when I go to these ceremonies, there's always the younger people in the front and closer. And then especially in these small towns, there's the circles in the back. They're watching from a distance. And I think it's these people who really have the personal connections, sometimes quite negatively, about what has happened. And they're still trying to deal with it because they come out of that older generation still that never talked about it and went through this brief denazification period, whatever this really meant. All right, so searching for families, this is what I do. And I'll run through this part kind of quick because I think most people are here to talk about the Stolpersteine on a larger social level, let's say. of course, they asked me to find the families because they want to invite the families back to Germany, and they don't know where the families are. So they call or write me, they get my name, and I look and look and look, try and find the families. When I do find them, I try and call them on the phone. Usually the people are quite elderly, they hang up on me, and I write a few letters, and eventually it gets through. Another reason is they want to add a human element to the history of their town or their city. It's easy to say there was a Jewish family that lived here, but of course it makes it much more real for everyone when you see the descendants, when you hear the personal stories, when it indeed becomes personal. Many of the people in these communities are hoping also to get, even as scans, archival documents and artifacts, things they can use to publish books, articles, and newspapers about the history of the Jews in their town in the Holocaust time. To learn more about the people who once lived in the community, that's kind of the same thing. And establishing a relationship. I'm sure that many of you who have been in ceremonies in Germany and Austria have established relationships now in those countries, personal ones even, and perhaps you have a lot of communication or even go back and forth and visit each other. Rolf, for example, in Bruxelles, often comes to America now and visits different family members all over the United States. And they less often go to Germany, but they do sometimes go as well. But I think it's more imperative that the Germans and it's more common that Germans and Austrians would come here because, everyone has also in some ways, it's 2-3 generations later, so it's moved on and there's not so much personal attachment anymore to Germany or Austria for most of the families today. Okay, this is a little bit about the research. That's the reading room. Here at the center, where research can be done. Now this is I'm going to go through this very quick. This is really going to be a lot of my talk. But now I'm really going to just rush through it more. So, there's certain things about searching. And I'm going to tell you some really basic things if you do genealogy. When you type a name in Google, put it in quotation marks. You've got to do that because then it will search for those two things together. If you type in Samuel Rosenthal, it will look for Samuel and Rosenthal. You'll just be completely lost. So that's my little thing. You can say Samuel and Rosenthal, which will look for those two things in one text. And you can use or, which will expand your search a lot, or not, saying Samuel but not Rosenthal. But those are all, the top thing is what's important. Always use quotation marks. That's my tip to everyone. All right. I had to look for a woman named Dora Frankenstein. So you can imagine when I didn't use quotes. All I got was all about the monster. Maybe Dora was an actress in the movie or whatever. Now when I use quotes, found her right away. No problem. There you go. Aren't you glad that I'm not going to dwell on this too much? Genie is a very good resource because unlike Ancestry and unlike Family Search, both of which are available free here at the center, but otherwise you need a subscription, Genie you can get to it straight from Google. So you type the name in quotes and you just say Geni, Genie, often it'll come up right away. There's a lot of stuff in there. So that's a really good, super easy way to try and find people and create family trees. Facebook. So I had to look up someone, a family named Sinai from Vienna. So I went up here and I typed it in and I got a guy who lives in Vienna named Sinai, and I got this guy, Brian Gold. He's talking about the Sinai family in Vienna, his relatives. So I saw that, I wrote him, and now we're in contact and it's the right family. So Facebook is actually a really good tool. I'm not like some crazy fan of Facebook, but it is actually really good for genealogy. There's all these Facebook pages now, like one's called Jews, Yuccas Engaged, Worldwide in Social Networking. There's German ones. There's many German Jewish pages. German Jewish history in Posen, German Jewish history in Silesia, and there's these people on there who are really, really into genealogy, and they know a lot. So they're very good to avail yourself of, and I often do. All right, that's my example of that thing I wrote down. And then finally, archival collections. So at the Leo Baeck, we have about 40,000, a little over maybe, collections. And sometimes, of course, the families are represented there. So if we had a Sinai family collection, I could have typed it in our catalog and it would have come up. And then, of course, it's very easy. We often still have contact with the families, and I can see who the donors were. I can call them and let them know this in this town in Germany or Austria is planning a Stolpersteine ceremony. They're looking for you and your family. I also use this. I do a big restitution of books project. And so I use all these things, search things to find people. The city library in Nuremberg has a list of hundreds and hundreds of people who had books looted from them in the Nazi times. And I go through that list kind of methodically, a little at a time, find the people, because they want to give these books back to the families today. And so that's another big project I do. It's actually very interesting. It's going a little off topic, but the reason all those books are in Nuremberg is because Julius Streicher, who was the owner of Der Stürmer, the big Nazi anti-Semitic newspaper, what he liked to do is he liked to take facts and twist them and make very anti-Semitic stories out of them. But to do that, he actually had to know about Jewish stuff. So he had his men loot Jewish books, and he created actually a reference library of Jewish books for Der Stürmer. And then the writers in Der Stürmer would go to the book and find something true, like, Moses came down from the mountain with the commandments, and then they twist it around to some crazy anti-Semitic story, but they could also use these citations from a real book. So this is, and those are the books now, and they're books from all over Germany and Austria. So some of your families could well be on the list, actually. And so afterwards, Julius Streicher was hung in Nuremberg, the Nuremberg trials, and the books were given to the Nuremberg City Library. And now the City Library is trying to restitute them. It's a little off topic, but but archival collections are another way, of course, to find people. The Aufbau is another good way. That was the German Jewish refugee newspaper here in the United States. And as you can see here, I purposely chose this page. Lots of announcements. And after the war, long lists of survivors would be published. And where people went, where they were going. Also marriages, births, deaths, everything are in the pages of the Aufbau. So that's a very good resource. And we have digitized the Aufbau at Leo Baeck Institute, and it is word searchable. So you can actually go and type in the word and hit enter, and you'll get all that word all through the run. And then you can just go to that page and look, see if it applies to you, I have found 2 people for Stolpersteine ceremonies using the Aufbau. Okay, and this is just a part. I actually originally had these more as parts. This is about remembrance, obviously. So there's many different aspects to Stolpersteine ceremonies. I'm going to talk about the Bruchsal one. This is, in fact, in Bruchsal. These are different Jewish families and some of the Germans of Bruchsal together having drinks, obviously, and it's the day before the ceremonies. So what Bruxelles does and what many towns do is they don't just do where you go and stand by the Stolpersteine and they put it in. They, this in the case of Bruxelles, there were dinners, there was concerts, there was people were put up in hotels, at least at a discount, sometimes totally. And the town worked really hard to make it special for people. They took people to ancestral homes, showed them where the families had worked, to the Jewish cemeteries so they could see the graves of ancestors. Since some of you are into genealogy, I guess, this guy here is actually Alex Kaselrath, the famous. He's a big deal genealogist in the German Jewish world. He also has roots in Bruxelles. You sometimes go to local Jewish museums. So this was in the town of Breisach on Rhine. And the woman in the wheelchair, Anita Geismar is her name. A lot of her family originally came from Breisach. So we're standing there. Anita had a very interesting time because she did not know she was Jewish or she had any Jewish blood. So that was a real shock for her to find out. So it's been a real learning experience for her. She had no idea she had relatives who had been killed in the Holocaust or anything. She thought that she was just German farmer immigrants or something. Her grandfather had never talked about it. And he had come, to be sure, before the war. But he still never talked about the family. This is also in the museum. We're getting a tour in Breisach. Here, this is a model of the Bruxelles Synagogue. And one thing that has happened in Bruxelles, and with all the Stolpersteine that have been put in, is now there's a movement to the old synagogue. The old synagogue was burned down on the Kristallnacht, and then the fire department was built there, which I know is very strange. And and they know that's pretty strange. And now the fire department is moving, and the city, these people who started the Stolpersteine initiative, are now pushing to have a museum for the Jewish history of the state of Baden put there. Because Bruxelles, though it's smaller, is right in the middle of Baden. So it's something they're working on now. But anyway, for the program, they had a thing of the synagogue. This is some people who've been invited to Bruxelles. This is at the Firehouse. They had a plaque to remember the synagogue. Always overgrown, always overgrown. So some of the families, descendants, they went and tore the shrubs down. Which was kind of meaningful, it's meaningful in a way to work actively to ensure that it's not forgotten. Visits to cemeteries. This is a cemetery in Bruxelles that this is someone's ancestors. I put in another example. This was a very recent one in Lofinger for a man named Killian Gus. He was not Jewish, but he was a petty criminal. And he was an alcoholic, and he was considered asocial eventually. The Nazis arrested him, and they murdered him. And they had a small gathering at the Stolpersteine where people came. They played some music. They put a picture in flowers. They laid the stone in the ground. That was kind of an example that, of course, it's not just Jews who are remembered. In Bruxelles, the little books and the family histories are researched by high school students at the gymnasium. This is their teacher. These are the students today who did the research. And I actually work a lot with those students because the teacher kind of has them write me. And then that's exciting for them. And then I put them in touch with the families, and there's this back and forth. And at the Stolpersteine, they often stand and read about the family. They, in a sense, present their work. I told you about the Bruxelles Synagogue debate. That's the picture of the old synagogue, the interior before the Kristallnacht. I've also been in Schwäbisch Gmünd. This is in a small town in Swabia. This is the site of the former synagogue, and all the Stolpersteine work kind of led up to this movement to create a larger monument to remember the site of the synagogue. They invited everyone who'd already been there for the Stolpersteine ceremony back. This replicates the stairs of the synagogue exactly, but we're seeing it from the other side. You feel like you're going up the stairs into the synagogue, but at the top, of course, the synagogue is no longer there. There's just nothing. And these are the descendants of the Jewish families that used to live in Schwäbisch Gmünd. And that was a very big, well-attended event. So a lot of times these Stolpersteine ceremonies, they're on the way to leading to bigger events, to larger books, larger discussions, larger projects, like now this discussion about the museum in Bruxelles, about the history of Jews in Baden, which has really taken off. I'm not saying it's going to happen, of course, but the Stolpersteine often, as I see, is just the beginning. So I'm going to stop there, and I'm right on time. And I'm going to open it up to questions or comments. And do you want to pick, or should I can just choose people? Okay, so yes.
I was invited.
I'll repeat it too.
Okay, I was invited to a Stolpersteine, ceremony by a relative in Israel. Called me and said that, some other relative or the other, whatever. Anyway, I couldn't go for whatever reason. But I found out that actually the families have to pay for it. So I offered to contribute.
Mm-hmm.
So I was just wondering about how it's.
Yeah, no, that's a really good question.
Families pay for this.
Yeah, so it's different in different places. She asked about families contributing money and paying for the stones. There's many ways this is done, but it is definitely true that families will end up paying some or all of it. They're usually asked to make a donation towards it. And I don't know so much about for Günter Demming and him himself as an artist, because it's not a lot of money. But it has been a debate. The German government, the official German government and the municipalities, they rely on these working groups to raise the money, in a sense. They're supporting it, but they are not paying for it. So they're raising money in different ways. In the case of this Killian Gus, the criminal, that Stolpersteine was created because someone from that town became interested in him, started speaking about him in local schools and asking for donations to put a stone. And he raised the money, and then he paid for that stone to be there. Some families, they just pay for it all and put the stone in, and they contact the city directly. The working group, the places where there's very active working groups, like in Bruxelles, they work very hard to raise the money so that the families do not have to pay, or they feel that paying a donation is you can or you can't. But in some towns, because of the lack of funds, they'll say a donation, but it's really like you need to make one.
This was Berlin.
Yeah, and in Berlin too, of course. Yeah.
So just a question, yesterday you mentioned objections to the Stolpersteine.
Yeah, I'm happy to talk about them. There are objections to the Stolpersteine. And in Munich, for example, they are not allowed. The head of the Jewish community, or one of the heads of the Jewish community in Munich, has never liked the Stolpersteine. Objections to it include people step on them, so that seems degrading. Dogs urinate on them. People literally stumble on them and then swear. or whatever. Other people don't notice them at all. They get cracked, they get dirty. So for some people, it's definitely true. There's a group of people, that sounds like some organized group. There's a minority, it is a minority, but it's a present minority that do not like the Stolpersteine and do not support it and think there should be another way of remembering. Another part of the issue is Günther Demning has his own ideas about it because it's his artwork. So for example, in some towns, they're trying to come up with their own kind of Stolpersteine or their own kind of thing that's not Günther Demmings because they don't really want to deal with him. They find him difficult. They don't want people to have to pay him, whatever the cases may be. Yes.
Yeah, and just to amplify that point, a friend of mine came from Gunzenhausen, and what they did was not allow the Stolpersteins in one central spot where the synagogue was formally created a wall with all the names.
Mm-hmm. I know someone too in Bamberg, and she is very against it. Her grandfather's remembered in one, and there's already a street named after him. After the war, they renamed a street after him because he was a prominent figure there. She's actively working to get the stone removed. But she is also mad because she doesn't know who put the stone there, and the city won't tell her. Some working group in Bamberg got it together, got the money, wanted to memorialize her grandfather this way, and she's like, "Why didn't they tell me? They're in contact with the family." So for her, it's been a kind of demeaning. Yes, standing.
Yeah, I was just gonna touch on that. Some other towns, they don't like the stones either, but they're actually contributing to it. Like my mother's city in Foot, and they are putting them on the sides of the houses or the buildings there instead. But so they're actually almost at eye level when you're walking down the street. They don't have them on the ground.
Yeah, I think more and more are doing that.
They're also helping to pay for it.
Yep.
Hi, there's a hand up over here on the other side.
Oh, okay. Sure.
Okay, so, my last name is Happerling. There aren't very many of us. And, my nephew, who's one of the few that name, met a German couple, he and his wife. And he has a son and daughter, the kids. And, Manhattan phone book just has my name with. When we once had phone books and my grandmother and she died. So to get to the point, how do you determine what is a German name? Because my nephew met this couple and they said, "Oh, there's biscuits and it's your name." And I have the package with me here if someone wants to see it. I've got my name on the package and there's 4 different flavors. But my father came from Linz.
Well, we'll talk afterwards because I'm not sure what a German name is either all the time. Okay. Yes.
I have a somewhat unique situation. My name is Sam Grunner, and my family, my dad was born in a small German town called Ilmenau in Thuringia, which was East Germany. And he was very successful in actually the building that his parents erected in 1929 is still there. It was preserved, and he fought very hard to get title to it, and that's the short story. But when I went with him in 1993 to negotiate and sign the final transfer document, and I mentioned to him, Abba, I said, I was born in Israel. I call him Abba. You know, your parents, my grandparents don't have a grave. So could you put into the agreement some sort of provision of the sale that there be a plaque placed on the building on what this building really was at one point? And we went to Braunschweig at the time. It was a West German company, and they bought the building and no problem. And they put up the plaque. This is 1993, long before Günther Demming started. Fast forward to about 2000 or so, where he was starting to place these, And we did have a local initiative, a working group, and we didn't pay for any of it. Came and put 3 Stolpersteine in front of its store. It was my grandfather, my grandmother, and my grand uncle, who was the brother of my grandmother. They founded that store. Beyond that, the town, it was this group, this grassroots group, put together yet another memorial, a municipal memorial, to the former Jewish families who were all, killed. So depends on the town. Here, we didn't spend anything. The owners of the purchasers of the property agreed to do it, and on top of that, the town itself put up a monument. And then I was just there in May. They have regular events. They do vigils. This one was on May 10th. Because in 1942 that was the deportation date, so we went to all the, well, not all, but most of the Stolpersteine. There aren't that many in that town, and there's always something going on. And of course, on Pogromnacht is what they call over there rather than Kristallnacht. There was a separate ceremony. So, and the committee keeps it up. They spend money on making sure that the Stolpersteine stay in good condition. And in fact, there was some damage, and they took care of it.
Yeah, that's like in Bruxelles too. Is a similar example. They're the people don't pay anything.
What do you know about his family? Who were Günther Demming?
I know very little. I don't really know anything about him.
He's not Jewish.
He's not Jewish.
No, he's not.
In Berlin, we saw a number of them in front of Humboldt University. Is that unusual, or were those faculty members?
I don't know because I haven't seen them, so I can't tell you. It's possible they're faculty members.
There's a website of just Berlin.
Yeah,
Stolpersteine,
I know
and
at the
it's
University of
viral.
Vienna, there's stones from former faculty members sometimes too.
Can you
So it's
repeat the
possible.
question for?
Oh, yeah.
Of people who don't stand up.
Yeah.
Ask them.
That's fine. Yeah, at Humboldt University, there's a lot of Stolpersteine in the ground there. He was asking if these are former faculty members. I said I do not know, but it's possible. I know at the University of Vienna there's some stones for former faculty members, so it seems likely. I guess. I'll repeat the question.
If they don't stand up.
2 things. When we were there recently, we did notice Stolpersteine in places where it was not, obviously was not the home. It was a different building, but I guess the address. Was where the stones were put. But the other thing is the genesis of many of them where families want their own families to be memorialized and they contact Demming, or does it not work that way?
It does work that way as well. But I would say it is more likely, it starts usually with the working groups in Germany. Though not all the time, We're talking about how the Stolpersteine initiatives, who pays for the stone, going back to that topic. Sometimes it's the families, but most of the time it's the working groups. They initiate, literally, raising the money and trying to put it in. I also know on your topic about how sometimes there'll be no house there, it's the former address, but the actual house is gone. This can be a problem. So for example, in Bruxelles, and it's different municipality to municipality, but one thing they've done in Bruxelles is they said it has to be in front of a person's home. So I know a person from Bruxelles, and her home, her family home was now a parking lot. So she doesn't want a stone because there'll just be cars parked over it all day. And this is actually a big issue for the city because they've written in the rules for the Stolpersteine in Bruxelles that it's always where the last chosen home was. But now this isn't going to work for this woman. So can the rules be changed, etc., etc.? Lots of meetings, lots of discussion. Yes, the woman, yes.
Okay, I have a few things. To go back to your first slide, if you're looking for names and you put the first name and the last name in quotes and that doesn't work, try flipping them. Because some listings you will have
But as far as the Stolpersteine are supposed to be the last place where somebody wanted voluntarily lived, I was contacted by a town where my parents had lived, and they were doing Stolpersteine for the Jews in the town, and I wrote back to the man saying, this is wonderful, thank you for contacting me. I need to make you aware that my parents left this town, voluntarily went to a different town. Your town is not the last place they lived voluntarily. The answer I got was sort of, we don't care, we want to remember all the Jews that were
Right.
here.
Well, that's a good town. Yep, it's different town to town. But
That
that's,
was the first one. The second town, when I made the second town aware of that, and they were doing some Stolpersteine, they were no longer interested.
right.
Actually been, because they've already been honored. I have a few family members that have memorialized in various locations, because where they worked wants to honor the people that worked there, where they lived wants to honor them. In one case, I approached a town that had done Stolpersteine, unaware of my relatives, and I approached them afterwards, and they said, oh yeah, we're doing one more ceremony, we'll include. And when I started telling them, asking them, how do I send the money, because I was willing to pay for the 4 stones, they got back to me and they said the local bank manager has covered them. Thank you very much. So there are all kinds of.
Absolutely.
And one more thought, I wanted to place a stone for my grandmother who was killed in the Isvika that you mentioned. And I decided I can't make a decision, let me poll my cousins. And some of them were in favor and some of them were adamantly against it. There's no grave, this is gonna be like their grave and people are gonna be stepping on her grave.
Yeah.
And
Yeah, it is something many people feel. It also goes a little bit into the idea of going back to Germany at all. For some people, it's just not possible. Yes.
So you mentioned Demmings, who was the first one to initiate all this. So I assume there are other people who have the monopoly to do this, or how does it work in terms of like, and in other countries, how would that work?
Yeah. Other countries have other people.
Yeah, but
yes.
He's the only one who could do this in Germany.
In Germany, using this exact model. So some people are trying to create other models. So in Breisach, they're trying to create, they almost look like river stones, and they're rounded, and they have the name and the birth and the death, and that's it. And they don't say anything about the place of death or any of this.
But he has the monopoly on this.
Otherwise, he has a monopoly on it. It's true. It's under his copyright.
It's a copyright.
But,
yes.
But I guess because I'm from Belgium, other countries, I know they do it in Belgium too. They have probably other people who do it for them, right? I mean.
Yes, that's correct.
Right.
Yeah. Yes.
So I was in Austria recently, and I was on a Jewish tour, and the woman there said that, at least in Austria anyways, that they very purposely put the stones in the ground and not on the building. Because if it's on the building can be sold and somebody can take it off and change it or whatever. And if it's in the ground, then the municipality takes care of it. That's interesting.
Yeah, that is interesting. I can't say, I don't know too much about that. Well, the comment was that in Vienna, they put it in the ground, they don't put it in the building, because if the building is sold, those stones could be removed by the new owners. Now, I don't know too much about the legality around that, but it does remind me of this case in Amsterdam. I don't know if people remember this, where there were stones, and this was also on the sidewalk in front of the house, but it depressed the family inside the house, and they asked the city of Amsterdam to remove them. The city of Amsterdam said, no way, and a huge kind of protest broke out via words, like the newspaper articles and stuff, and the family had to back down. They were overwhelmed with people attacking them for wanting to remove those stones. I don't know enough about the laws in Vienna and
Michael,
so on.
I have a relevant example.
Oh, okay. So this man has an example
Well,
for you.
I have an issue. The building that my grandparents bought was ultra modern in what I thought was a Bauhaus style, because this was the fashion, real modern in 29. But this past year, I found out it really was even beyond that. But the problem there, it's a glass front, 2 stories glass, okay? And above that was the residence. And the only place at the time to place my dad's plaque was above the glass, which would be, it's like this. You gotta look about 20 feet up. And after all these years now, it's starting to wear. And we learned that the original purchaser of that building had sold it to somebody else. And under German law, they cannot disclose who bought it. You know, in this country, you go to the deed book, you can find out who bought a piece of property. You cannot do that in Germany. So this last visit, we met with the mayor, the Oberbürgermeister, who's a young guy. He was just elected last fall. He's like 38 years old. And he's sympathetic and he'll try to work something out. He can't disclose who bought the building. But we're trying to figure out, my dad dictated the plaque, the language that he wanted. It's really, that's what he wanted to tell, is a story. And it's tellingly, this plaque is a warning to future generations about intolerance and so forth. That is too much information for those, the Stolpersteine. So I'm working with the committee who is working with the culture committee in the town to try to mimic the Stolperstein style, just make it bigger so that it contained the language that my late father had dictated. So it is an issue, and it's now with the municipality, and it's a political football, so to speak. It's a problem.
How long do we have more here?
20 minutes.
Oh, we do? Okay, so there's plenty of time.
If people do want to start grabbing wine and refreshments, though, by all means.
Yeah, I'll keep taking questions, but people can also help themselves. Yes.
I have.
And everything is kosher.
I have a general question of history, really, which question which you may not know the answer to, or maybe someone here does.
I'll ask.
Okay, but it's my understanding, if I remember 100,000 years back in history, Germany was wiped out financially at the end of the First World War. They had nothing. They had no money, no economic system. They were destroyed. And I always said to myself, where did they get the money to start invading every country around them? Where did they get the arms? Where did they get the bombs? Where did they get all of the money it takes? And I always thought to myself, well, it would have been very convenient to decimate an entire group of people, take every single hair on their heads, and then they would have money. Has that ever come up?
That in Germany, the Jewish population was very small, actually. So it wouldn't be so applicable. Yeah, even a little
But in
less.
Austria, they were wealthy.
No.
No?
I mean, middle class people,
Okay.
generally.
Okay.
Maybe we could get some kind of a picture of how widespread the Stolpersteine are. I'm thinking about, we saw in Frankfurt, we saw a long wall, an entire street, and the whole long wall was just one little Stolperstein after another. There must have been several hundred on this one street. So I think it was unique to Frankfurt. I don't know if there were others like it elsewhere in Frankfurt, but it seems like a lot. Is it actually a lot, or is it
that particular thing?
The country as a whole. How likely is a German or London likely to actually see a Stolperstein?
Yeah, I can say it. He was just asking about how popular the Stolpersteine are in Germany. If you go to Germany, are you likely to see one or not? I would say if you're looking at the ground, yes.
Yes.
They're quite a lot. Is it most of the people who were killed? No. But it's still quite a lot, where I think if you go to Germany or Austria and you're looking down, you will eventually see a few.
The big cities for sure.
In the big cities, Munich doesn't.
No.
Munich doesn't, but I think that's the only big city at this point. Yes, in the back.
I'll try to be brief.
That's okay.
I'll say, we have Stolperstone in front of my grandparents' home in Augsburg, Germany. It was all initiated by the town, particularly by one very devoted local historian. we were invited in 1998 for the first Ramnach, and a lot of our family went back just now in 2018, where this time there was a whole drama done, and time in 1998 there was a concert, and so I would say that, and also the people who live in the home now really respect the Stones, and we have a relationship with them. We've been invited to their home, their daughter, I've spent time with their daughter in New York City, she was here for a conference. So I would say that these are stones that really have a lot of life and help spur a lot of conversation, education, relationships, affirmation of suffering. It just reverberates in a lot of ways. As far as stepping on them, we all are urbanites. We all step around things on the sidewalk all the time. So I don't think it's too much to expect that people will step around those stones when they go by. I wanted to make one other point. In the current issue of Atlantic Magazine, which is the August issue, those who subscribe have it. If not, it's worth going to the library to read it. There is an article by Drew Faust Gilpin, former president of Harvard, about her childhood home in Virginia and the whole history of racial relations in Virginia and the whole issue of seeing and not seeing. And I would say that we Jews in America and we Americans have much to learn from the Germans in terms of recognizing history and how history is alive today and how some of the worst aspects of our history are alive and well today. And I would really urge you to read this very thoughtful, reasoned and personal article in Atlantic Monthly.
Very good point.
Thank you. Yes.
It's just kind of like, I guess everyone has the same genesis. Germany is known for clean streets. I don't think that anybody would desecrate stones deliberately. They probably could be prosecuted for that.
Well, some of the stones have been purposely desecrated.
But they can be prosecuted.
They can be prosecuted. Yes. Yeah.
That's number one. The second thing is, I wanted to find out, have you determined how you allocate your time to help people? Because there's the Spielbergers in New York, and I didn't pay. It was just a little research I did, and they didn't want to, I couldn't find them. How do you determine how you help?
For us at Leo Baeck?
Yes, because I've been there with Moria, and we worked on this extensively, and I was able to find them. I know where my father's cemetery is at and everything, but I still have difficulty.
Yeah. I mean, we help when people come in to visit us. We help them kind of on site. Otherwise, there is a reason. Leo Baeck is $25 an hour.
Oh, so you think I should make an appointment with you?
Yeah, you could. Sure. Talk to me afterwards. Okay. Yes.
When you say that the Stones are not in Munich, we were recently in Germany and in Munich, and I recall, I'm quite sure that I recall that near the main train station, they're not, I didn't find them on the sidewalk, but I found them on the inside, on the walkway into a store. So I think there's a way of getting around it.
Possibly.
They have a new format that they standardize. They have a new design, kind of like these bus stops you see in the city. It's a fixed format. That's what one of the things we were discussing in my dad's hometown. Can they come up with a new concept, a graphic treatment that's not buried in the ground?
Yeah, I don't know about these in particular, but it's interesting to hear about.
Does Demming only do the ones in the ground, or does he do them on buildings?
Only the ones in the ground.
So if you see ones on buildings, that's somebody.
Right. He doesn't have that copyright. Yes.
Also in Munich, which is where my family is from, I believe, I don't think it's, there's a program to put plaques on the wall of the synagogue.
Yeah, I don't know too much about the other programs in Munich. I know there's always a lot of discussion about how things should be remembered in Munich, and I feel like the discussion is always changing. Yes, the man in the back in the blue shirt.
You listed some other companies besides Germany where these stones are put down. I just want to add to that. I was recently visiting the University of Rome for a lecture, and I noticed in the Jewish area, there are a lot of such stones in Rome now.
Yes, that's true. They have laid many on Rome, actually. Mm-hmm. Yes.
Is there a database for listing of all of them?
Demming.
Yeah. On his website there is one. Hello, by the way. I didn't know you'd be here.
How many are there?
Stolpersteine and all. I don't. I probably have it vaguely written down, but it's always changing. So even. What is it now? Does anyone know?
50 to 60,000.
70. I think it's more like 70,000.
Are you saying each individual name is now searchable in a database? Each person I didn't.
There's different databases. So sometimes the towns, the communities themselves will have a database for the Stolpersteine, and Goocher Demming on his own website. I don't know if he lists them all though, but he does have some listed. But I would go to the city. Yeah, this website for the city, and I would look around that way.
He also has got a large backlog.
Yes, he's hard to book.
I've been trying to do some in Amsterdam.
Yes.
I made my reservation, my application, I guess 2 years now.
Yeah,
It was supposed to
it's.
happen in 2019.
Mm-hmm.
They just got back to me and they said, we don't know when, but not.
Yeah, it could take a long time now. There's a big list.
And he personally does all the work, right? No assistants.
He has some assistants in the workshop, but yes, he's the one who drives out.
And he comes with the hat.
Right, he always has the same look. Yes.
So how does a descendant initiate this process?
It would be to contact the city or the district and find a working group. A Stolpersteine working group. Or you could write the city directly and say, do you have such a group? I'm interested in having a stone laid, and then introduce yourself.
Even in a large city like Vienna?
For that, I would try and find a working group within the local. There's 2 groups in Vienna, actually. And so it would just be to contact one of them. If you write the Leo Baeck, I can give you that contact information. It's hard to find I don't know about you, but many times for people, it's hard to find because you don't know German, I don't know if you do or don't. But anyway, I have the 2 organizations there.
And do you have contact information for other countries?
No, I don't. Only Germany and Austria myself. And sometimes it takes a little bit of digging. There's no giant website saying Stolpersteine working groups. You have to kind of look around for one.
Are these working groups in Vienna, are they commissioned by the city or?
They are not. They're self-created by interested citizens, but not.
The city has to approve it?
The city does have to approve the actual laying of the stones. Yes.
And then in Austria, you don't have a copy of it.
No, correct. It's other people who do it in Austria.
We can contact you, as you said, for the 2.
Yes.
Two.
Yes. I can easily give that to you. Just write the Leo Baeck. Yeah. All right. So I think that's it. Thank you for coming. Let everyone